Welcome back to Posture Labs and Alignment Fundamentals. My name is Emma and thank you so much for joining my YouTube channel. We are on episode 24 of this series. So each week I release a new posture, giving some different alignment cues and helpful tips on how to do the pose correctly or with modifications. This week is a fun one. We are getting into Bakasana, which is crow pose. This will be the first arm balance that we cover. It might be the only one that we cover since this is more for foundational poses, but we'll see how long the series lasts. As of right now, I'm fully planning to go through the whole year, so we'll have to see how many poses we can come up with. But Bakasana is probably the most common arm balance that you would see in a yoga class. I have definitely offered this in many of my vinyasa and other style classes on my channel. I try to break the pose down as much as I can without taking away from the class. So that's why this little workshop or tutorial might be helpful for you if you're first learning the pose. Now, I give a few options with blocks. So if you have a block or two, you might want to grab those. You could also grab like a pillow or a bolster. Sometimes people find that helpful. I'm just going to jump right into things. So if you're not warmed up, you might want to warm up like your hip flexors, your inner thighs, your wrists, and your shoulders. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to jump right into explaining things. For Bakasana crow pose, there's a few things I like to explain before I even demonstrate. First off, your hands. I like to grip a little bit with the hands, almost like you're making suction cups with your palms. So you can't really see here, but instead of doing like a flat pancake palm on the mat, that's going to put a lot of pressure in your wrists. So we want to spread all of that weight, all of that pressure from your body out into all these other little joints, these little knuckles on your fingers. So the more you can grip with the pads of your fingers, I think you'll find that helpful. It'll give you a lot less pressure in your wrists and make the pose a lot more sustainable if you practice it for a long time or do a lot of reps, whatever. So first off, that's with your hands. Next is your arms. I want you to think Chaturanga arms here. So if you practice yoga frequently, you know for Chaturanga, we bend our elbows back instead of out like we would for a regular push-up. If you're unfamiliar with that, I might suggest you go back and watch some of my other tutorials. I have a whole tutorial on vinyasas, Chaturanga, and sun salutations you might find helpful. Second, or I guess third, would be your gaze. Usually for yoga, we want a nice straight spine. So you want to lengthen through the back of your neck. However, here, I actually like to suggest that you kind of crane your neck a little bit so you can look forward. Like a lot of coaches will say for different sports, where your gaze goes, your energy goes. So think baseball, snowboarding, basketball. Same thing here. We want to be gazing forward and up. So we are kind of like lifting our body forward and up, not gazing down and back and resulting in a somersault. Let's see. I think that's about it. Of course, the more you engage the rest of your body, the easier this pose is going to be. It's challenging on your upper body, so might as well make it a little bit more comfortable for yourself by trying to engage your lower abs, your hip flexors, and your inner thighs as much as you can. I like to start this pose kind of in a standing forward fold, like I'm on railroad tracks, my feet behind my hands. This already requires a bit of hamstring flexibility, as you can see. So if necessary, I could stand onto a block. That way I can bend my knees even more while still getting my hips up nice and high. So that's the first option for the block that I have. Once you have your feet lined up behind your hands, you'll start to lift your heels as you bend your knees. So heels up, knees bend, and bend your elbows back. The goal here is to get your knees up as high as you can into your armpits. Now, most of us will start a little bit too far away, so you might need to even walk your hands back a little bit. As I start to bend my elbows back, imagine making a shelf with your triceps. Your knees are going as high up into your armpits as you can, but they're not going on the outside. So you're not wrapping your knees around your arms. This will actually make the pose a lot harder and give you a lot more work to do with your inner thighs and your lower abs. So I know it feels a little bit funky or weird, especially the first few times. We don't usually bear weight on our triceps, but I promise this is the correct way to do the pose. Your knees are on the back of your arms and you're shifting your weight forward. Now this is going to be my step 1 with both feet still on the mat. I'm going to look forward near the front of my mat, almost like I'm pulling my sternum forward. Then I might lift one foot up off the mat and maybe take tiny little hops with those other toes. Eventually, that other foot will lift up off the mat as well, and I want to focus on bringing my feet together. As I bring my feet together, I have to think less about engaging my lower abs and my inner thighs. So if I just think feet together, those things kind of naturally happen versus me having to think about all of those body parts having to engage. Now, once I get up, I like to think about my hands as kind of a gas pedal and a brake pedal. The more I shift my weight forward into my fingertips, the more my body weight goes forward, and the more I shift weight back into the heels of my hands, the more my weight goes back. So when you're up and you feel like you can't quite find that center, try to shift a little bit forwards and backwards. Make sure you're gripping with the pads of your fingers, and you'll hopefully find a little bit more stability that way. Like I said, I like to gaze forward, but if the fear is getting a little bit in the way, I know in this pose it's pretty scary, especially if you've never done it before, you can always grab a block. I like to start with that block on the medium height and put that out in front of you. You'll still set everything up the same way. Line your feet up behind your hands, lift your heels and bend your knees. Bend your elbows back. Drive your knees as high as you can towards your armpits and shift forward. I can't look forward as much, but I'm going to bring my forehead down towards the block, then maybe lift one foot and maybe the other foot up off the mat. So now I can't look forward, but I can get a feeling for the pose with a little bit of extra help from this third point of contact, my forehead. Now I'm still using my elbows as a shelf. I'm still engaging my core. Maybe eventually I start to float my head off of the block and bring my gaze forward. So there's a few different options you can use to get into the pose. If you're doing this at home and it's a new pose to you, you might also like to put some pillows or bolsters around you or in front of your face. Sometimes just knowing you have a soft surface to fall on makes it a little bit easier to attempt the pose. Now there's lots of places you can go from Bakasana. You can go to Bakasana, which is pretty much the same thing with straight arms. This to me just requires quite a bit of practice. The setup is exactly the same. You're just using a little bit more core strength and a little bit more of your hands, thinking about that gas pedal and brake pedal as you start to straighten your arms. You're going to be using less of a shelf and more of your abdomen to hold you up. So what that kind of looks like is if I get into my Bakasana crow pose, and then I work to straighten into my arms. I have to kind of shift my weight forward a little bit, squeeze my core a little bit more, keep gripping with the finger pads. I want to hug my heels up towards my butt as much as I can. And my arms aren't even completely straight because I don't think I can do the pose fully. However, that's the way you'd want to work into something like crane pose with straight arms. You can also, from crow pose, drop into a tripod headstand and then come back to crow pose. These things are a little bit more challenging, and I would recommend maybe having a teacher in person so they can watch you. Just because you're going to be going from crow pose, placing your head on the mat, there is a chance that you turn your neck the wrong way. So I would recommend doing that with a teacher you trust in person. From Bakasana, you can also jump back into Chaturanga. Now, I teach this in some of my classes. I'll go over a few tips I have to jump back into Chaturanga Dandasana, but you'll need to be able to actually do Chaturanga first. So I am talking about Chaturanga with your knees up. So as we bend our elbows back and we hold in this four-limb staff position, your thighs floating off the mat, not the knees down variation. Now there's nothing wrong with the knees down variation. I love to do that when I practice yoga as well. However, for our jump back, we are landing in our four-limb staff pose with the knees off the mat. So if you can't hold that just yet, I would practice getting that strength, holding that low plank position. Then eventually you can work into your jump back. For the jump back, I like to split the mat up in thirds. So if I'm starting at the front of my mat in my crow pose, I'm gonna think about jumping all the way back would be the full variation. I'm gonna take 2 steps before that to learn this. So I'll demonstrate what I mean. I know it's a little confusing. So if I'm starting in my Bakasana crow pose here, and I wanna jump my feet back, first, I'm gonna need to press a bit through the heels of my hands to catapult my weight backwards. Just like I said earlier, use your fingers and the heels of your hands as a gas and brake pedal, same thing here. Now, I'm gonna jump my feet back only 1/3 of the way and try to hover my knees off the mat like a hovering tabletop. Then lower my knees down. So that right there is a little bit easier. It's still challenging, but that's where you're gonna start. Just kind of sliding the knees off of the triceps and landing with your knees hovering. The knees hovering is the important part because when you jump back, you've got to keep your knees off the mat. Once you feel like you can master that little 1/3 jump, we're gonna come back to our crow pose and then try to jump your feet back 2/3 of the way, so a little bit farther while keeping your knees off the mat. And then you can lower your knees down. So even if they're just a centimeter off the mat, you're really just working on your arm strength and kind of your abdominal strength to hold your body up. Once you feel like you can master that 2/3 jump, that's when we would come back into our crow pose. I really want to push through the heels of my hands to shoot my weight backwards. I'm going to shoot my feet back and land in my low chaturanga. And then maybe drop myself down to the mat. Eventually, I would be able to come up to my upward facing dog and go back to downward facing dog. That one's pretty challenging. It can take a while to learn. So try not to get frustrated with yourself. It's a pretty challenging pose. Crow pose in itself is pretty challenging. So it's something that's gonna take you more than one tutorial, one day, or even a week to learn. But the more you practice it, the easier it will become. Make sure you stretch out your wrists before and after practicing this pose. Give your shoulders some extra love and don't overdo it. Make sure to stretch. If you start to get sore, you can take a break. Don't be surprised if you've never done this before and now you just start doing a lot of crow poses. You may have some bruising on the back of your arms. I promise that goes away with time and is very normal. If you would like to learn a little bit more about inversions and arm balances, I do have a 1-week-long kind of workshop. So every single day of the week, you get to learn a new arm balance or inversion. This is available for purchase or for rent on Vimeo, and I'll make sure to leave the link in the description if you're interested in learning some more arm balances and inversions in a similar style to what I just did. Let me know if you have any other tips or tricks on crow pose. I would love to hear what has helped you with this pose. Yeah, that's about all I've got. Let me know your thoughts in the comments if you like this more challenging class, and I hope to see you back next week. We will be doing not another arm balance. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hit the subscribe button if you feel called.